And it really does break my heart as well that we're not focusing on that. And 16, 17 days later, we're still talking about, as you put it, a toxic gent who very much stole the limelight for himself.
Is it really only 16 or 17 days? It feels like months that we've
I know, right?
forced to confront this agony. At its best, football can bring us so much light, joy and meaning. At its worst, football can force us to confront so much that's dark in this world. And the recent Spanish Women's World Cup win has forced us to experience both. On the tail of one of the single most glorious footballing tournaments I've ever had the honour of witnessing, won by that feast of kaleidoscopic passing, tenacious of spirit collectives, that Spanish women's team who gave us so many moments of wonder, delight, courage and perseverance. Instead, we're here to talk about a forced kiss, a sexual assault perpetrated on live television before the watching world by one man, a man who most of the world didn't know until that act and the crotch grabbing which preceded it. Luis Rubiales, a toxic gent who now seems willing to burn it all down, to salt the earth in his wake, rather than take even a modicum of responsibility for his actions. We'll get into all what's happened. We'll talk about what needs to change and what can be learned from this truly awful situation. But first, our guest. I've got to say, I've loved watching her appear across networks and country borders for many years now, but she's seemingly been everywhere at once in the wake of this awful event, offering clear, empathetic, moral light in the midst of this darkness. She's Barcelona-based, but still the pride of Los Angeles, where she was born and raised. Hola, Semra Hunter.
Hola, Rog. Really, really happy to be here. Thank you for such a lovely introduction.
Semra, it is incredible to have you here. And I've got to say up top, I'm so bloody sorry about the circumstances. We should be celebrating the incredible women who won the World Cup in unprecedented fashion, the holders of senior, under 20, under 17 titles. But instead, we must plummet into the darkness of dodgy men. And I do want to acknowledge that before we do, that it feels tragic not to be able to celebrate the players' moment.
I completely agree with you. It's taken the shine off. It's taken the focus off. These women completely deserve it. It's really remarkable what these women achieved in the face of adversity, in the face of the worst crisis that they ever had to deal with in Federation history. And they still managed to come out on top. They managed to put all of that aside, come together, unite for a common cause, and actually come out the other side basically unscathed in the end. It is so astonishing. And it really does break my heart as well that we're not focusing on that. And 16, 17 days later, we're still talking about, as you put it, a toxic gent who very much stole the limelight for himself.
Is it really only 16 or 17 days? It feels like months that we've
I know, right?
forced to confront this agony. But let's begin this heavy, dispiriting tale at the origin. The players, jubilant, celebrating, moment of victory, filing to pick up their medals. The president of the Spanish Federation, a bald bloke named Luis Rubiales. He wraps up iconic Spanish forward, Jenny Hermoso, essentially his employee, in a hug, held her head, both sides in his hands, pulled her face in for a forced kiss on the lips. Rubiales proceeded to fireman carry Atenea del Castillo, was photographed kissing other members of the team on the cheek and the forehead. Let's quickly go through a quick and dirty timeline of the immediate fallout. A live stream of the celebration right afterwards, Hermoso said that she, quote, really didn't like that. And criticism began coming immediately from the players, the media, the Spanish Prime Minister spoke about it. And the next day, Rubiales issued an apology. I use that word euphemistically. It's really a football apology, if you could call it that, saying, I am sorry to those who were offended. The Spanish Federation then put out a statement allegedly from Hermoso herself, calling it a neutral gesture, trying to put out the fire. But even bloody FIFA didn't see it that way. They opened disciplinary proceedings. Rubiales announced an emergency meeting with the Royal Spanish Football Federation. Nearly half of the members declined to participate. Spanish media was actually briefed. I remember, raising a glass in their direction that he would resign and that Vice President Pedro Rocha would take over. But what came instead was one of the most hubristic events that European football has seen in recent times. And my lord, there's a lot of competition in there. Self-serving bombastic speech. Rubiales called the kiss consensual and bellowed 5 times in a row.
No voy a dimitir. No voy a dimitir. No voy a dimitir. No voy a dimitir. No voy a dimitir.
I will not resign. I will not resign. As the crowd in the auditorium, most of them applauded. Shameful, unbelievable, surreal. At one point, Rubiales said, "Did you really think I was going to resign over a peck?" It's honestly hard to read that quote out, the juxtaposition between what he did, assault, and how he was painting it. Which leaves me wondering, could Rubiales have gotten away with this sexual assault if he just sincerely apologised, talking vaguely about lessons learned, promised that, sensitivity training for everyone, including himself, and tried to quickly sweep it under the rug?
You know what? I think he would have. And I think that's actually one of the questions that's been raised regularly over the last couple of weeks in Spain. And the general consensus has been he probably would have gotten away with it. And instead, as you very rightly say, that apology was very half-baked. It wasn't an apology. It was just, I'm sorry if you were offended by my actions. And I actually think I did nothing wrong. And that's the problem with him. He genuinely believes he did nothing wrong, which is why he refuses to apologize, because his ego is so big. I mean, honestly, he reminds me of Icarus, someone who thinks he can fly and touch the sun and nothing's going to happen to him.
But Semra, describe Rubiales, the man, to us, as he's known in Spanish football circles. And what was it about him that led this man to be able to rise to power? Because I do always wonder if the brazenness, the sleaziness is what propels people's rise, or whether they rise so that they can be brazenly sleazy.
I think there's a component and element of fear of those who come up against him because of that brazenness that you speak of, because of the arrogance. And like I say, I think because in the past he had gotten away with so much that it only fueled his confidence, his belief in himself, and his veracity in terms of wanting to have power. And he became drunk off the power that he was getting. And there were people for years who were saying, listen, this is a man who should absolutely be nowhere near power. And unfortunately, he was voted in. And I think a lot of it initially had to do with the fact that he actually did do a good job in the administrative roles in the early days. He did do a good job in coming out and defending the players and saying, listen, we're going to make sure that there are consequences. If clubs don't pay your salaries, you're going to be covered, and trying to get a small percentage for them from the broadcasting rights as well. And so I think he did garner a lot of support in the early days. But obviously, it took a turn for the worst over time.
Tell us about Vilda, the man, and the gap between what the Spanish players were used to at the elite culture, club culture of Barcelona and Real Madrid on national duty.
So Vilda as a man, well, a lot of people see him as a Rubiales 2.0, that he is basically complicit in a lot of the behaviors and the actions of Rubiales, that he very much shares the same kind of mentality, the same kind of philosophy. And that's why, for example, you would see him clapping along in the assembly to every single word that Luis Rubiales was saying. And he seemed so happy about it as well, the fact that he wasn't going to resign. And of course, he was offered a nice bumper contract for 4 years and €500,000 a year, €2 million, and so on. And interestingly enough, he's also a man that is a bit, I would say, deluded in the sense that he's a bit out of touch with reality. He was on the Spanish radio last night, and some of the things that he said makes you just scratch your head, because it's very similar to how Luis Rubiales refers to himself. For example, he was asked why he clapped along to Luis Rubiales, and the answer was, well, it's a bit complicated not to clap along when everyone else around you is doing it. It's like, hello, what? Say what? It's not that complicated, man. All you have to do is not applaud if you don't agree with what's being said. Another thing is, he's like, oh, I've known Jenny for 16 years, but have you spoken to her? No, I haven't spoken to her as of yet. Silence. In no point in time has he actually shown any kind of support to her.
The controversial, widely despised coach was sensationally fired by interim Federation President Pedro Rocha in a weird statement, which actually praised the hell out of the man.
Yeah.
Made Vilda, they were firing him, made Vilda sound honestly like Sir Alex Ferguson, to be honest. It was full of gratitude for services provided, no mention of his coaching staff resigning, that his players refused to play for him anymore, that there were upcoming games in September, so the firing was necessary, not that he was loathed by his players. They took out, this would be, the Federation wrote, one of the first measures of restructuring that they would undertake. And the Federation later announced that he would be replaced by his deputy, Montse Tomei. She'll be the first ever woman in charge of this women's national team. Her debut will come September 22nd against Sweden. Tomei, an assistant on Vilda's staff since 2018. It's not a coach that I have insight into, but Sandro Riquelme of DAZN España tweeted, "My opinion, a half change, same methodology as Vilda, way of working. I wouldn't call it a revolution precisely. That being said, all the luck in the world." How has this move been received by the players and the fans? Because in moments like this, we love to project, yes, change, it's all over, it's being taken care of. But what's your opinion?
I completely agree. And I think most people in Spain also share that sentiment. This is a transition. It's not a change, and it's a cosmetic change. It's the Federation trying to say, hey, look, you wanted a woman. Well, there you go. Well, that's actually not what they asked for. They didn't ask for a woman. They asked for somebody, female or male, but who had the credentials, the know-how, and the experience to run the elite ship. And as you say, this is just a continuation of what was already in place. And there's discrepancies amongst the media as to how the players feel about this, because the players actually haven't said anything as of yet. And I think that in a way is almost revealing in and of itself. It's been almost 24 hours and no one has said anything. So there are some outlets that are saying, yeah, the players, they like her. They've been getting on with her for a long time. They have a good relationship and so on. But then there's others who say, well, actually, they feel a bit hard done by because she took the side of Vilda when the 15 sent the email. Again, it's probably a bit of a tricky situation because her job was probably on the line as well. So we have a lot of information that is missing, I think. But still, having said that, there are fractures, there are ruptures, and there are still very much disruptions amongst all of these players. And so is it really the right choice? She also doesn't have any experience at this level. She's never been a first team head coach before. So she's a little bit out of her depth and out of the water here. I mean, obviously we've seen managers who have been in that kind of position before and they've gone on to be successful. So she could be successful, but at least on paper, you would think probably not the right fit. They wanted someone who was a little bit more capable of running this kind of ship at this point in time. And so it's a missed opportunity, I think, in many ways to have brought in fresh blood, something completely different. We don't know she's going to bring in the coaching staff that was there previously with Vilda or not, if she'll use the opportunity to bring in new people as well. Because if she brings back the same people, then nothing has effectively changed. Only Vilda is gone.
But this moment from afar, it seems to transcend football in Spain. Societally,
yes.
For the past 2 decades, Spain has pioneered gender and equality legislation. Could you fill us in on what this moment in Spanish feminist history looks like? Big picture. How the Rubiales assault is igniting a much bigger conversation.
I think in an almost ironic way, he's become an agent for change, and not the kind of change that he obviously would like, because he's so in denial about his own machismo behavior. But he really has sparked a massive wave of support for women's rights. And so I think people, women in particular, really empathize with the moment. It struck a chord with them because so many of them have gone through something similar, but obviously in a more private scenario in the workspace, where they've been on the receiving end of harassment, where they've been on the receiving end of sexual aggression or violence or misogyny or sexism. Now, because it was so public and it was so very open for everyone to see, I think now it really was a call to arms, and people said enough is enough. We're not going to take this anymore. We're going to stand up against anyone and everyone who's going to treat us this way, because it is an issue in Spanish society and culture. It's very prevalent and it's very normalized, which is part of the problem. I'm not trying to say Spain is a sexist country. I don't think that's it, but it is something that exists within society that does need to be looked at. And I think one of the things that makes me really proud about all of this is that people are finally taking this seriously, from, anyone on the street to anyone in the workplace, to mainstream media, to sports media, to politicians, to whoever. We've been talking about this nonstop for 2.5 weeks now. What is acceptable? What is not? What has to change? Where can we do better? What kind of self-reflection can we do? What can we learn from this? How can we improve? How can we actually establish ourselves as maybe trailblazers in some way to have a positive effect outside of Spain and in football and for women as well? And so it's been really interesting to see how Spanish society has really reacted so strongly to all of this and so unanimously to all of this as well, that it really has taken on a whole life form of itself. And that's why, I think you mentioned it, the president of the CSD called it the Me Too moment. And it really is the Me Too moment in Spain.
FIFA suspended Rubiales, meaning he's barred from football activities while they investigate, I think, for 90 days. But UEFA are yet to make an official statement. Their president, Schäferin, made some belated comments about the, quote, inappropriate behavior. But Rubiales is a vice president of UEFA. And it's honestly shocking that they can retain a silence in this moment. We're way beyond the phase where silence almost becomes complicit in this moment. But there's also the damage Rubiales is playing, or could play, in another role he has. I mean, bloody hell, this man has more fingers in more pies. I don't know how you say that in Spanish, but bloody hell, he is leading the bid of Spain, Portugal, and Morocco to host the 2030 World Cup. How much is the latter play into the late efforts to clean house? At a certain point, there's simply too much at stake, right, for too many people to not oust him.
Yeah, and that was the belief from the beginning. That whole thing around the bid has been a main focal point and a reason why people thought he would be pushed out almost straight away. Because Spain, and it's not just the federation, but a lot of the government members as well, take this incredibly seriously. They really want to win the bid to host the World Cup, the Men's World Cup in 2030. And so they are very concerned about how the optics look around this and the damage that it could have on the candidacy. And so that's what we kind of all thought, is that would take precedence. That would be a really important factor in trying to get Rubiales out. But clearly it's not enough so, because here we are in a bit of limbo where he's still the president, but he's not the president. And as of yet, no one's really taken the initiative or the responsibility to say, we need to do the right thing here and remove him of his post. And I don't think it's even necessarily just about the kiss anymore. I think it's about the whole aftermath and the whole way that the federation behaved, and how you talk about coercion, how he tried to get Jenny Hermoso to appear in the apology video with him because he knew he was going to lose his job potentially. And he knew that he needed her support. And how Vilda didn't actually speak to her, but 3 times went up to her family and tried to put pressure on them to convince Jenny to come forward. And then the fake statement, allegedly, that was put out on her behalf, which she said she never said any of those words. So it's just one thing after another. And it's that behavior that just makes you think, well, the federation are clearly not going to do the job. They're protecting him, so it has to come from somebody else. But we all thought that the bid would be important enough that it would see his removal. But clearly it hasn't been. So I'm not so sure anymore what kind of weight that holds in this whole thing.
So what is in store, Semra? I mean, God, I just hate for her family. I hate for Jenny also in this moment. I mean, none of this is why we watch football. We need to acknowledge that. None of this is why you play football. This is not why you want to win things, savor things, make memories. But you wrote a great piece about this issue, and you made it very clear. This is a systemic issue. It's not a one-man issue. It's not a one-incident issue. This is a case of women not having a voice as part of governance. This is marrow deep. So what do you think will happen in terms of really creating change? Or do you expect in Spain that there'll just be a lot of platitudes in the hope that the rest of those that hold power can retain it?
It's a great question. And the optimist in me, because I'm a fairly positive person by nature, would love to think that this will bring about the much needed change. But so far it has been platitudes, I think, more than actual actions. They haven't really put their money where their mouth is. And so will things really change? I have my very serious doubts about that. You even look at the statement that the men's team put out. First of all, it was really late. I mean, sure, better late than never. It's nice that they said something, but it came extremely late. And sure, it was the first time that they've all come together to play for the national team because they have games this week and so on. But what was stopping them from putting together a statement a week ago? They all have WhatsApp, they all have phones, they can all reach out to one another, they can all draft a statement, they could put it out on social media. They didn't have to wait until they held a press conference. So I think a lot of people are disappointed in that. The other thing is the statement itself was very short. It didn't really lend itself to opening up the floor for people to actually have a conversation with them about this. I mean, the last point, it was just like, they shut things down. It was like, okay, we've made our statement. We're really against Luis Rubiales, his behavior. We don't stand by it and it doesn't reflect us and so on. And we really show our support for the women and so on. But now we want to get back to football and we only want to talk about that. And it's like, well, actually, you are such a perfect person or group of people to actually speak up about this. Why? You're icons, you're heroes. People look up to you all over the world. If you can actually allow for this conversation to have, imagine the good that it would do for these women. And I think in Spain, a lot of people are really upset about this because they feel as though the fact they've been so incredibly silent, bar literally 3 players, they feel as though it's a form of complicity. And obviously, they're all going to have their own reasons as to why they haven't spoken up about it and so on. And I'm sure it's all perfectly valid as well. I mean, no one is forced to say anything against their will here. But that would have also been a great demonstration of really trying to be a catalyst for change. The fact that they've said nothing, as you said, UEFA have said nothing, and even FIFA. I think the disciplinary proceedings are in a completely separate body within FIFA, but like major players really haven't come out and said anything either about all of this. So you do kind of get this feeling like everyone just kind of wants to move on from it rather than really staring down the barrel of the gun, really looking at the ugly truths that are there and working through them properly to actually bring about meaningful change.
Across the globe, we've seen people rallying to Hermoso's side, statements from teammates, from players, including iconic players such as Andreas Iniesta and Xavi. We've seen rival teams coming together before games to hold banners, NWSL players wearing wristbands that read Contigo Jenny, with you Jenny. And after Spanish teammate Alexia Putellas used the expression "se acabó," it's over, or enough is enough on social media, it's quickly spread in its own right as a hashtag. We can see the positive roots of an uprising of people refusing to take it from mediocre yet powerful men who see football as their own personal fiefdom to rule, to plunder as they see fit. Are these moments of self-reflection, I mean, do they amount to something in your mind that can fan into a fire that can alter society and hopefully the footballing landscape permanently? Or will it, I don't want to even say the other side of it, that they'll just flicker out?
I think it definitely has the ability to cause change. I think the fact that Jorge Vilda was let go, the fact that they actually did that, even if it turns out to be the only action really that they take, at least it's still something. I think that it shows how the power of words, the power of communion, the power of people coming together for a social cause, for social justice, the pressure behind all of that, or that it creates, it can bring about good. And maybe it's a small victory, but eventually there will be more small victories and they accumulate and it will turn into a really big victory. And I think in some ways, maybe the legacy of this women's national team, it's not just about the win that they had at the World Cup. It could be an even bigger win in terms of having real positive change on wider society.
It does swell my heart to hear that kind of a vision. Honestly, ultimately, for true change to occur, listening to this, we just need more women to run the sport at the highest levels. I do believe women's football will never truly be free until the women who play it are safe, respected, and ultimately able to control the growth of their own game. Let's end on that, Semra. Thank you so much for plunging into the darkness with us and casting light on the walls, to better days ahead for all. Contigo, Jenny, and Semra, gracias.
De nada. Thanks so much for having me.